It was a quiet afternoon at a small neighborhood convenience store. The sun filtered softly through the dusty windows, casting long, lazy shadows across the aisles. A few kids laughed outside, chasing each other across the parking lot, while the faint sound of a street musician's guitar drifted in from the corner. Everything felt peaceful, almost ordinary. Inside, the shelves were stocked neatly, the smell of fresh bread and packaged snacks mixing with the warm air. A few customers moved slowly from aisle to aisle, lost in their own errands. The cashier hummed a tune as he tallied a customer's items, completely unaware of the storm about to enter his store. At one end of the store, an older man, calm, composed, eyes scanning the shelves, reached for a bottle of water. He moved deliberately, every gesture measured, radiating a quiet confidence. There was nothing flashy about him. No expensive suit, no entourage, no threat. Just a man going about his day. But beneath that calm exterior, there was an intensity most would never notice until it was too late. Something about him felt different, almost untouchable. And some people have a way of sensing danger without knowing why. Outside, a shadow loomed at the entrance, someone looking for trouble. Someone who thought this quiet afternoon would be easy to ruin. And no one inside, not a single person, had the faintest clue what was about to unfold, because one man was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. The air in the store felt charged, as if the calm itself were holding its breath. Something was coming, something fast. And when it hit, nothing in this small, ordinary convenience store would ever be the same again. The older man continued calmly through the narrow aisles, scanning the shelves. He wasn't in a hurry, didn't glance around nervously, and didn't seem to notice the chaos that was quietly creeping in. Customers moved past him, oblivious to the tension that was about to ignite. From the corner of the store, a tall, rough-looking man appeared. His jacket was worn, boots scuffed, and there was a swagger in his step that suggested he was used to getting what he wanted. His eyes scanned the room, lingering on the older man as if he had singled him out for sport. Without warning, the man bumped into the older man's shoulder. The older man barely reacted, just a slight tilt of his head and a polite, almost apologetic smile. "Watch where you're going, old man!" The bully barked, his voice sharp, loud, cutting through the calm air like a knife. The store seemed to hold its breath. The older man's hands were empty, his posture relaxed, his eyes steady. There was no fear in his voice, no anger, just a soft, measured tone as he said, "Sorry, didn't mean to get in your way." But the apology only seemed to fuel the bully's aggression. He leaned closer, a sneer spreading across his face. "You think you can just bump into me and apologize? You're nothing, old man, nothing." A few shoppers glanced over. Phones were slowly emerging, recording this strange interaction. Something about the older man's calmness didn't fit the situation, and people could feel it. The contrast between the bully's loud, chaotic energy and the older man's quiet composure created an almost tangible tension in the air. The bully shoved him slightly, just enough to make it obvious it wasn't an accident. "You think this is some joke? You need to learn your place." His voice dripped with contempt, his eyes glinting with malice. The older man didn't flinch, he didn't shout, he didn't even raise his hands in defense. Instead, he slowly adjusted the bottle in his grip, keeping his voice soft but clear. "Violence isn't necessary, but it's your choice if you want it." The words barely registered to the bully. He laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed in the small store. "Choice? I'll teach you about choices, old man. Let me show you how respect is earned." And with that, he stepped closer, towering over him, ready to escalate the situation. The older man's eyes scanned the room not out of fear, but as if calculating, observing, weighing. Every movement precise, deliberate. The crowd around them began to notice, instinctively pulling out their phones, some inching closer to watch. There was something magnetic about this older man, something that made it impossible to look away. A young woman behind the counter whispered to her coworker, "Who is he? He looks different. Like he's not someone you mess with." Meanwhile, the bully circled him, taking up space, trying to intimidate, trying to assert dominance. But the older man remained a rock, calm, still, unshakable. His posture, his gaze, his aura all said the same thing: "I am ready, but I'm not the first to move." Then the bully raised his voice again, taunting. "Everyone here sees it. You're weak. You're nothing. Just an old man who doesn't know when to keep his mouth shut." People in the store began whispering, their curiosity growing. The clash of energies, the bully's rage versus the older man's serene composure, was electrifying. Some felt fear, some felt suspense, Some felt an odd admiration for the calm man, and every second stretched longer, as if the store itself were holding its breath. And then, just a flicker in the bully's expression, he realized this calmness wasn't fear. It wasn't ignorance. There was something else behind the older man's eyes. Something sharp, something dangerous but controlled. The bully smirked anyway, brushing it off. He thought this was just another target, another opportunity to humiliate someone for his own ego. He had no idea what he had walked into. The older man, still calm, still composed, picked up a bottle of water and held it casually, like a man at peace. "You don't need to do this," he said softly, almost gently. "You still have a choice to stop before things get worse." The words were calm, but to anyone paying attention, they carried a subtle weight, a quiet warning that this wasn't a man to underestimate. The bully laughed again, louder, more confident. "Worse. You don't make me laugh." The tension had reached a boiling point. Every person in the store sensed it. Phones were recording, whispers were spreading, and the air seemed to thicken. Something was coming, something inevitable. The stage was set. The calm man remained calm. The bully remained arrogant. And for a moment, time itself seemed to pause. Because no one inside that store, especially the bully, had any idea that this calm, composed man was about to turn the entire encounter upside down. The store felt heavier now. Every movement, every breath seemed louder. The bully's smirk had grown wider, as if he could sense the growing attention from the onlookers. He leaned in closer to the older man, towering over him, his face twisted with mockery. "Seriously? You think just saying sorry is enough?" he shouted, his voice echoing across the aisles. "You think calmness will save you? People like you are easy to push around." The older man didn't move an inch. He remained still, arms relaxed at his sides, gaze steady. Not a flicker of fear, not a hint of hesitation. There was a quiet strength in him, the kind that made people instinctively step back, even when they didn't understand why. People in the store were starting to take notice. A young mother with a baby in her arms froze mid-step, unsure whether to intervene or just watch. A teenager holding a soda whispered to his friend, "Due to something about him feels different, like he's not just calm, like he's dangerous." The bully wasn't done. He circled the older man slowly, like a predator testing its prey. "You think you're untouchable, old man? You think just standing there makes you some kind of hero? Pathetic." The words hit like a hammer, designed to humiliate. And yet, the older man's calmness didn't waver. His lips barely moved as he responded, voice low but firm. "Your anger doesn't define me. It defines you." The crowd shifted. Phones came out, recording every second. There was a strange fascination in the air. People could feel the contrast, the bully's chaos against the older man's serene composure. Something about this stillness was magnetic. The bully grew impatient. He shoved the older man, hard this time, just to see a reaction. But the older man didn't flinch. He didn't stumble. He adjusted his posture and looked the bully square in the eyes. His calmness wasn't weakness, it was control, a quiet declaration that he was fully aware of what was coming. "Is that all you got?" The bully spat, now red with frustration. "Come on, old man, show me some fight, or are you too scared?" The words only drew more attention. Customers leaned closer, some whispering to each other, others holding their phones high. Everyone could sense the tension, the storm about to erupt. And yet, the older man remained calm, like the eye of a hurricane, unaffected by the raging energy around him. There was something almost hypnotic about his composure. The more the bully yelled, the calmer he became. People began to feel the weight of it, an unspoken warning that this wasn't just a harmless old man. The bully, sensing the shift, laughed, too loudly, too harshly. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue. You don't have a spine, do you? Everyone here is watching, old man. Prove you're worth anything." He slapped the counter for emphasis, making the coins jingle, drawing more eyes. And then he did it. He grabbed a can of soda and threw it near the older man's feet. The metal can clattered across the tile. A hush fell over the store. Every person inside felt it. The moment had escalated from tension to outright disrespect. And yet, the older man didn't move to pick up the can. He didn't react. His calmness was unnerving, almost frightening to anyone who had expected fear or anger. The bully's frustration grew. His face reddened, his breathing heavy, his fists clenched. "You're gonna regret this," he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. And then, in a final act of provocation, he leaned close and whispered, "You think you can stand there and act all peaceful? I'm gonna make sure everyone knows you're nothing. That's what you get for standing there like a fool." The words hit the air like a trigger. The older man's eyes didn't flicker, didn't narrow. They just held the bully's gaze with a quiet intensity that made the man hesitate. For the first time, the bully sensed that his opponent wasn't just calm, he was in control. And that control was dangerous. Around them, the energy of the crowd changed. Whispers turned to murmurs. Some people stepped back instinctively. Others exchanged nervous glances. Everyone could feel it. This was no ordinary confrontation. This calm man, who had been so unassuming just minutes ago, was not someone to underestimate. And then the moment came. A line was crossed, though no one could predict exactly how. The bully, consumed by his own arrogance and frustration, raised his voice again, this time targeting the older man personally. "You think just standing there makes you a man?"
"You're a joke. A pathetic joke."
The store went silent. Everyone stopped moving. The tension was unbearable. Phones hovered in the air, capturing the moment. All eyes were on the older man, and all eyes were waiting. Because no one could have guessed what was coming next. Not the bully, not the customers, not even the cashier. The calmness, the control, the quiet intensity of the older man, everything was about to shatter the bully's world. Then the bully crossed a line he could never uncross. The store had transformed into a pressure cooker of tension. Every eye was on the older man and the bully, the air thick with anticipation. Customers stood frozen, unsure whether to intervene, flee, or simply watch. Phones hovered in mid-air, recording every heartbeat of the encounter. The bully, sensing the attention, grew bolder. He leaned forward, glaring, face flushed with frustration and arrogance. "I've had enough of your attitude," he barked, stepping closer. "You think you can stand there and ignore me? Time to teach you a lesson you won't forget." The older man didn't move. He didn't blink. His calmness, unshakable and unnerving, radiated like a force field. Yet the bully didn't notice, or maybe he didn't care. Arrogance blinded him. Then it happened. With a sudden motion, the bully's hand shot forward. A sharp slap landed across the older man's cheek. The sound cracked through the air like a gunshot. Metal cans rattled. A bag of chips fell from a shelf. Time seemed to stretch, every second dragging the horror of the act across the faces of everyone present. The store went silent. The clash of energies, the bully's rage and the older man's calm, hung in the air like a living thing. Shoppers froze mid-step. Even the cashier, who had seen petty fights before, felt a chill run down his spine. And then nothing happened. The older man didn't retaliate. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't stumble. He simply stood, the faintest crease of surprise on his otherwise calm face, as if acknowledging an unavoidable inconvenience. Every eye in the store followed him, searching for the reaction that would never come, at least not immediately. The bully's chest heaved. He was panting, sweating, still expecting the old man to crumble.
"Come on," he shouted. "Hit me back. Show me some respect."
The older man's gaze shifted slowly, deliberately. His voice was calm, measured, almost soft. "You just crossed a line you'll regret." The words seemed to hang in the air, heavier than any physical blow. The bully laughed nervously, brushing it off as a threat without substance. But inside, a tiny seed of doubt had been planted. There was something in the older man's presence, something dangerous, controlled, and inevitable, that no one in the store could define. Shoppers began whispering among themselves. "Who is he?" one asked. "Why isn't he reacting?" Another murmured. Phones still hovered, capturing every moment. The tension had grown almost unbearable. It wasn't just a slap anymore, it was a challenge, and everyone could feel it. The bully, growing frustrated at the older man's unshakable calm, stomped his boot against the floor. "You're pathetic," he barked. "Pathetic, weak and scared. You think I'll let you humiliate me? You're going to regret this." And then, in a desperate act of humiliation, he leaned in even closer, his face twisted into a sneer.
"Everyone here is watching. Do something. Show me who you are."
But the older man didn't move. He just held his gaze, steady, unyielding. And in that moment, the bully's bravado began to crack. There was a subtle shift, almost imperceptible, that made the hair on the back of the onlooker's neck stand up. Something was coming, something inevitable. Time seemed to slow. The slap, loud and sharp, echoed again in everyone's mind. The bully, sensing hesitation in the older man's calm, raised his voice one last time.
"You're done. Everyone sees it. You're nothing."
And then, in that heartbeat before chaos erupted, the older man's composure transformed. He didn't lunge, he didn't shout. But his aura changed. It was a subtle signal, confidence so absolute, control so complete, that the bully froze for the first time. Around them, the store seemed to hold its breath. People could feel it: danger, power, and inevitability all wrapped into one quiet, older man. The bully, sensing he had overstepped, glanced around, realizing all eyes were on him. A cold sweat ran down his neck. The moment stretched, excruciatingly long. Every detail was magnified: the sound of the cash register's beeps, the soft murmur of shoppers, the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. And then the older man spoke again. Softly, almost too quiet for the bully to hear. "You've made a mistake that cannot be undone." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a bluff. It was a statement of fact. And in that instant, the bully's confidence crumbled. He had crossed a line. Not just in front of the older man, but in front of everyone. The silence was deafening. Every person in the store understood, even if only subconsciously, that the equilibrium had shifted. The calm, older man wasn't reacting in anger, because he didn't need to. The power was already his. But the man didn't react the way anyone expected. The store was silent now, yet every person inside felt the tension as a tangible force pressing down on them. The bully's face flushed with a mix of anger, frustration, and an unfamiliar unease. He had expected a reaction, a scramble, maybe a yell, but nothing came. The older man stood perfectly still, calm, collected, almost untouchable. The bully took a step back, his chest heaving. What are you waiting for?" He spat, still trying to force a reaction. His voice was sharp, but there was a tremor now, a small crack in the armor of arrogance he had worn for so long. The older man tilted his head slightly, just enough to look at the bully without a flicker of fear. His voice was soft, deliberate, almost hypnotic in its calmness. "I tried to stop you, not for me, but for you." The words were simple, yet they carried a weight so profound that the bully instinctively took another step back. Something in the older man's tone suggested experience, control, and consequences far beyond what the bully could comprehend. It was as if he were being warned, not threatened, but the warning carried an unspoken promise of retribution. People in the store whispered among themselves, trying to process what they were witnessing. Some glanced at their phones, hoping to capture proof. Others watched in stunned silence, sensing that what was about to happen was bigger than any fight they had ever seen. The bully, still clinging to his bravado, forced a laugh. "You think words can scare me? You think calmness can protect you?" But the older man didn't answer. He simply adjusted his posture, the faintest movement, almost imperceptible, like a coiled spring ready to release, but not yet. A subtle shift occurred. The air seemed heavier, charged, almost electric. Every customer felt it. The silence itself became a warning. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights above seemed to slow, highlighting the stillness. The bully glanced around, realizing that everyone's attention was fixed on this moment. The cashier's eyes were wide. The young mother gripping her child leaned slightly closer, unable to look away. The teenager with his phone froze, sensing that the calm man held power far beyond what he could imagine. "Why aren't you reacting?" The bully hissed, frustration creeping into his voice. He flexed his fists, ready to strike, ready to intimidate, but somehow the older man's presence held him in check. It was as if invisible chains bound the bully, preventing him from doing what he wanted most: humiliation. The older man's eyes swept across the store slowly, methodically, not in fear, not in anger, but in calculation. Every detail mattered, every movement counted. He wasn't planning revenge, he was planning control. And in that quiet, deliberate observation, the bully sensed something terrifying. He was utterly exposed, and the older man had already anticipated every possibility. The older man spoke again. Voice calm, measured, each word striking with precision, because the real danger isn't standing in front of you. The words hung in the air, chilling and cryptic. They weren't a threat to the bully, they were a statement of fact. And as the phrase sank in, a shiver ran through the store. People instinctively stepped back, some exchanging uneasy glances. Something was coming, something far bigger than anyone had imagined. The bully's confidence began to crumble. He had thought he was in control, that he had dominated the situation. But now doubt crept in. He looked around, expecting reinforcements, support, something to protect him, but all he saw were ordinary people, frozen witnesses to his arrogance. Outside, a faint sound reached the store, a distant engine, a low hum that went almost unnoticed at first. The older man's eyes flicked briefly toward the window, and for a moment, the faintest hint of a smile touched his lips. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but anyone paying attention would notice the shift. He wasn't alone. The bully, still unaware, tried to assert dominance one last time. "You don't scare me," he shouted.
"You can't scare me."
But the older man remained silent, He didn't yell, he didn't move. His calmness was no longer passive, it had become active, a force of nature that hinted at consequences the bully couldn't yet imagine. The hum outside grew louder, a subtle warning to anyone paying attention. The energy in the store shifted again. Every person inside felt that something far more dangerous was arriving, something that made the bully's arrogance look foolish in comparison. The older man spoke one final time, his voice quiet but firm, almost a whispered. Choices have consequences. Yours are about to catch up. And with that, the store seemed to hold its breath. The bully, for the first time, realized he had underestimated the older man. His eyes darted around, searching, panicked, but it was too late. He had walked into a situation he could not control. Shoppers felt it too. Phones recorded the tension. Hearts raced. No one knew what would happen next, but they all knew it would be extraordinary. The calm older man had shifted the balance of power completely, and somewhere beyond the doors, vehicles were approaching. Black SUVs, silent but menacing, carrying agents who would soon make it clear this was not just an ordinary confrontation. This was the moment when the bully's arrogance would meet reality, because the real danger wasn't standing in front of him. The hum outside the convenience store grew louder, unmistakable now. Tires crunched over the asphalt as black SUVs screeched to a halt just beyond the glass doors. Their engines cut out abruptly, leaving an eerie silence that only amplified the tension inside. Shoppers instinctively froze, holding their breath. Every phone still pointed toward the older man and the bully, capturing history in real time. The bully's bravado faltered, his chest heaved, and his eyes darted toward the windows, sensing danger, but not fully understanding it. What is that?" he muttered under his breath, a flicker of fear crossing his face. Then, without warning, the doors burst open. Men in dark suits and sunglasses poured out of the SUVs, moving with precision and authority. They formed a tight perimeter around the store, scanning the crowd, scanning the bully, scanning the older man. Their presence was calm but unmistakably formidable, radiating power and control. The older man's calmness never wavered. He didn't flinch, he didn't move. He simply looked at the approaching agents with the quiet confidence of a man who knew exactly what was happening. The crowd inside whispered, stunned. Phones were recording, and the murmur of astonishment rippled through the store. Who were these people? Why were they here? And most importantly, who was this older man? The bully's sneer faltered entirely. His arrogance had been replaced by confusion, then a growing, creeping terror. He had thought this was just a petty confrontation. He had thought he could humiliate an old man for his own amusement. And now he realized he was in a situation far beyond his comprehension. One of the agents stepped forward, hand raised in a gesture of calm authority. The older man finally moved, slowly, deliberately, and turned toward the approaching figure. A single man detached from the group, walking with measured steps, his presence undeniable. The crowd instinctively parted, creating a path. And then, the words that froze everyone in their tracks. "Dade, are you okay?" The store went utterly silent. Every jaw dropped. Phones wavered mid-recording. The bully's face drained of color. Every person inside the store struggled to process the revelation. The older man, Steven Seagal, nodded calmly, a faint, almost imperceptible smile on his lips. His voice was steady, controlled, as if confirming a fact no one else could yet grasp. "I'm fine. But you, sir, you've made a serious mistake." The bully's eyes widened in disbelief. "Why, you're—" He stammered, unable to form words. The realization crashed over him like a tidal wave. The man he had humiliated, the man he had slapped, the man he had mocked was not just any ordinary older man. The chief of Homeland Security, Seagal's son, now stood beside him. His gaze was sharp, authoritative, and utterly calm. Agents flanked them, surrounding the bully, who was finally realizing that his arrogance had led him straight into a corner from which there was no escape. The older man's calm had never been passive. It had been calculated, controlled, and backed by authority that few could ever imagine. The bully's humiliation, his arrogance, his foolish need to dominate, every single misstep had been noted. And now the consequences had arrived. One agent stepped forward, placing a firm hand on the bully's shoulder. The weight of the gesture wasn't just physical. It carried the undeniable authority of someone far beyond his comprehension. The bully's knees trembled. He looked around desperately, but the perimeter of agents ensured there was no escape. Seagal's voice cut through the tension, calm but absolute. "Respect should never depend on age, strength, or position. You learn it or you face consequences." The bully finally understood. The slap, the arrogance, The humiliation he had tried to inflict on a seemingly powerless man. Every action had led to this precise moment. The crowd outside the store, now spilling onto the sidewalk, watched as the reality set in. Phones recorded every second. The story was no longer about a petty confrontation. It was about power, control, and the terrifying consequences of underestimating someone who had lived a life far beyond ordinary comprehension. And as Seagal turned slightly, acknowledging the crowd with a subtle nod, the message was clear: this was not about revenge, nor about pride. It was about the consequences of crossing the wrong person. The bully had made a mistake he could never undo, and the world had just witnessed the moment he realized it. The older man stepped forward, walking past the bully with measured grace. Every eye in the store followed. No chaos, no shouting, just a calm authority that demanded recognition. The agents moved to secure the scene, ensuring the bully could not escape the consequences he had earned. And as the subs roared back to life, leaving the store and the stunned crowd behind, the lesson lingered in the air: arrogance, disrespect, and underestimating someone powerful would always have consequences, and some mistakes are irreversible. That's when the bully realized who he had slapped. The engines of the SUVs faded into the distance, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than before. The crowd stood still, processing what they had just witnessed. The bully, once loud and arrogant, now stood pale and trembling, surrounded by consequences he never saw coming. But what happened next shocked everyone even more. Steven didn't smile in triumph. He didn't mock. He didn't demand punishment. Instead, he turned back. The agents paused, watching him carefully. The crowd leaned forward, phone still raised, expecting a final dramatic moment, maybe anger, maybe revenge. But Steven walked slowly toward the bully. The same man who had slapped him. The same man who had tried to humiliate him. And in a calm, controlled voice he spoke. "You embarrassed yourself long before I ever needed to respond." The bully couldn't even look up. Steven continued, his tone steady, almost instructional. "Strength isn't proven by who you can intimidate. It's proven by who you choose not to harm." The words cut deeper than any physical retaliation ever could. Everyone in the store felt it. The mother holding her child, the teenager still recording, the cashier who had watched silently from behind the counter. This wasn't about power. It was about discipline. Steven looked around the store, making eye contact with several witnesses. "Respect," he said firmly, "should never depend on who someone is, how old they are, how they look, or what position they hold." He paused. "It should be given because they're human." The bully swallowed hard. The anger that once fueled him had evaporated. In its place was something unfamiliar: shame. For the first time, he understood. He hadn't attacked a weak man. He had attacked his own character. And now everyone had seen it. Steven didn't ask for charges to be pressed. He didn't demand public humiliation. He didn't escalate. Instead, he gave a final lesson. "You had a choice, you still have one. Learn from this." Then he turned and walked away. Not rushed, not dramatic, just composed. The kind of composure that only comes from years of control, discipline, and understanding consequences before they happen. The agents followed. The crowd slowly began to murmur again, reality settling back into place. But something had changed. People weren't whispering about fear. They were whispering about restraint. The teenager lowered his phone and said quietly, "That's real strength." The mother nodded. "That's what I want my son to learn." Even the cashier stood straighter behind the counter. Because the true power in that store wasn't the SUVs. It wasn't the agents. It wasn't the authority. It was control. And that's something no badge can give you. The bully was escorted outside, not violently, just firmly. His head hung low. For the first time that day, he wasn't trying to dominate anyone. He was thinking. And sometimes that's the strongest consequence of all. As the store slowly returned to normal, people replayed the moment in their minds. The slap, the silence, the calm response, the warning, the arrival, the realization. But what stayed with them wasn't the power. It was the restraint. Steven could have reacted instantly. He could have escalated. He could have proved himself physically. But he didn't need to. Because true strength doesn't shout, it doesn't react emotionally. It waits, it calculates, it controls, and when necessary it acts. That's the difference between aggression and discipline. Between ego and mastery. Between a bully and a warrior. The convenience store lights hummed quietly again. The ordinary afternoon resumed. But no one who witnessed that moment would forget it. Because they didn't just see a confrontation. They saw a lesson. And now I'll ask you something. If you were in that store, Would you have stayed calm? Or would you have reacted?